Yeah, so we've kind of got three parts here. We've got a privacy and security presentation, then our usual updates, and a bit about the upcoming training operations, and that'll be it. That'll probably take the hour. And I'm really pleased to have Jonathan Fairland with us. Jonathan is the Compute Canada Chief Security Officer. I think, Jonathan, you've been CSEC for a couple of years, and something like that. Yeah, so which is great, and he's going to come and talk to us about cybersecurity in the whole digital research infrastructure. I should note that Jonathan has been really trying to put Compute Canada set up the security framework for us, and has made some tremendous strides over the last couple of years. Still lots of work to do, I think, but we're trying to get all our policies organized, all our processes and such to be consistent, especially with things like government requirements and CFI requirements. It's a tough job for a Compute Canada Chief Security Officer. Because he's got to balance the strict requirements of things like government and regulation, and standard practices, with the, I think, more open approaches of researchers in general. We kind of get a bit worried when somebody starts to say we can't do things because of security, and trying to find, Jonathan, I think, the middle ground. It's not the easiest, so Jonathan has been doing a great job of that. Anyhow, Jonathan, over to you, and yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Patrick, for the opportunity to go talk about cybersecurity. This was a terrific presentation, Patrick, and introduction. I think to end that comment, I am of the position that security should be an enabler and not a showstopper. So we have to be creative sometime, but this is the path we have taken so far, and we hope we'll be able to stay on that path in the future. So let me introduce what I will talk about today. So I will at least try to introduce cybersecurity. It could be a very complex topic, but at least to give you a feeling of what you should be aware of in that area. I will then review the top 10 security recommendations from Government of Canada. And then I will try to give example of what that means in the context of research project. So we can move one slide forward, please. So what is cybersecurity? So I tried to gather examples or definition from outside, what people are using as definition. So I think it's fair to say that cybersecurity is not only about technology, it's also about people, how they behave and what they are doing and what they are not doing. Okay. It's also about the protection, but not only the protection of hardware, but also about software and data. And usually when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about electronic data, but security is often about every kind of data. It could be printed, paper data, it could be records, it could be a lot of things, but for the purpose of this presentation, we'll only focus on electronic data. Okay, and usually in the context of cybersecurity, we are referring to attack, damage, and unauthorized access. They are other kind of effects that we could use in cybersecurity, but usually these are the ones that are relevant. So we can go to slide 7. So what do we mean by cybersecurity then? What are the components we have to consider? So I apologize for the weird feeling of the picture. It has been resized. So there are a lot of frameworks that exist to address cybersecurity. They all have their strengths and their weaknesses, but in general, they are based on 8 common pillars. The very first one that we usually consider is the confidentiality one. But we have to be aware that the traditional cybersecurity is at least a consideration of 3 of these, not only confidentiality. It's also integrity and availability. And in most of these, we'll also talk about what we call auditability, authenticity, non-repudiation, accountability, and privacy. So if we go on slide 8, I will give definition or at least meaning of these terms. So what do we mean by confidentiality? So it is about how we control data access and how we disclose it or share it with other people. Okay, so they need to be control over that. Privacy is about restricting access to personal information. Availability is to make sure that it is there when we need it. Okay, so sometimes we are talking about archive, for example, which people think it's about preservation, but there is also availability consideration. If we try to get that data 10 years from now, we have to make sure that the data will be there and available at that point. Okay. Integrity means that the data is not corrupted. So it is what it is supposed to be. So if you're preserving picture and at the end you are not having the content of the picture you were expecting, then this is a problem, an integrity issue. Okay. It also means that if you're installing software and the software is not behaving as it should, it is also considered an integrity security issue. Okay. Auditability means that we leave trace, so we are able to investigate if something happens. Authenticity is about identity as well. It's knowing that everyone is who they claim they are. Okay, so we don't have someone that is impersonating someone else. Non-repudiation is that we cannot deny actions or lack of actions. So for example, if you are trying to blame someone, so you would have the controls in place to prove that this is possible. So that goes in pair with the auditability as well. And accountability is making sure that someone is responsible. Okay. So these are the 8 pillars. So now let's dive into what we call the digital research infrastructure, and then we'll talk about what security means into that context. So what is digital research infrastructure? So first of all, it's the people working in that area. So that might be support people, it might be IT people, it might be research specialists, it might be a lot of people. It's also about the research data, it's preservation, it could be the software we're using, it could be portals or gateways, it could be know-how, it could be a lot of research infrastructure, it could be the HPC facilities that Compute Canada is providing, its storage platform, cloud computing, could be its network. It also could be your lab instruments. So if you're exporting data from your lab to Compute Canada storage facility, then your lab instrument is part of what we consider the digital research infrastructure, at least from a security perspective. So moving to slide 10, what does that mean to digital research infrastructure for cybersecurity? So the first point is that all of these components are relevant, because an attacker or at least someone that is interested in getting access to your data will identify the weakest point and will exploit it. So the weakest point could be a transfer between your lab instrument and toward Compute Canada. So these relationships are important. Okay. Also, in many cases, you might not consider that these items or assets are not your responsibility, like the HPC environment, but you should assume as a starting point that they are in fact, because in many cases they will be shared, but to enable cybersecurity, you will need to do your part as well. So even if it's someone else's responsibility to secure the system, you still have to do your due diligence by asking the right question and doing your part in there. Okay. So if you are responsible for a research project, you are responsible for the burden of cybersecurity. It doesn't mean that others will not help you, but you have to run that security aspect. Okay. I'm providing here 2 links that are very useful if you want to dive more into cybersecurity. We should provide a 3rd one, which is about the data security itself. I have not came across a very useful link so far, so I'm not providing anything, but be aware that you also have to think about data security as a whole. So moving to slide 11. So what happens if you do have an issue with cybersecurity in the digital research infrastructure? The first thing that people usually consider is the reputation hit, but there are a lot of other aspects that are now coming into play. So the loss of competitiveness, that should not be neglected, because a lot of researchers are competing for a research grant. So if you are not competing anymore, then that means you are at risk of losing, your funding. So this is also the second point. It's not only competitive, but it's about funding. You could also have issue with finding collaborators, new students, partners from the industry or from other research projects. You should be delayed in your financial your research program, and also you could get sued from other entities. So there might be financial loss to you or to your institution. So we have to be careful with the implication of not having sufficient security measure in place. So moving to slide 12, what can we do then about cybersecurity? There are various tools and frameworks. They are, in general, complex or burdensome for research projects, so I'm not trying to push one of them toward you. I will go in a different direction, and I will try to use some of the Government of Canada high-level advice that they are providing to the industry, to academics, and to anyone that is interested about how to improve cybersecurity. So let's dive into the top 10 list of things that should be improved to improve cybersecurity. So that doesn't mean that there is nothing else to do, but these are the top 10 priority items that people should consider before going anywhere else. So I will go through all of these items in the coming slide, and I will try to give a feeling about what it means in a research context. For those of you that are operating at Compute Canada side and are in this meeting, be aware that it might mean a lot of different things depending on the scope of your work, but I will focus today on the implication I can think of for the research project. So moving to slide 14. First, a quick disclaimer. I'm not trying to provide a recipe or a complete view here. This is a very naive view that I can come up and quickly. You should go through these different items and ask yourself, what does it mean to my own research program, and what should I be doing about it? Okay, so you don't need to have a security training to be able to answer these questions. Okay, so moving to slide 15. So this is the first item. This is the definition that is provided by Government of Canada. So I will go through the exact same pattern for all of them. So the first one is Consolidate Munder and Defend Internet Gateways. So you might be wondering what it means for a research project. So I'm trying to highlight very specific words in there that might help us. So monitor the traffic. And what it means is it's more explicitly about external connections. So if you are behind closed doors, you will not try to monitor, or you will not focus first on what is being exchanged internally, but you will look at what is going in and out of your secured perimeter. Okay. They are also advising you to reduce the exposure to the external world. Okay. And they are typically trying to understand what is going on, and especially about unauthorized access, data exfiltration, and malicious activity. So going to slide 16, what does it mean to a given research project? So you should avoid to minimize the number of access points for your data. So having data on Google Drive, on Dropbox, on your own web portal, might sound very appealing to have redundancy, but in general, from a security perspective, it is very risky because you might not be able to secure all of them in the same way, and you might easily forget one of them. So you have to take control of your data and limit the number of access points. So the exposure of your data set should be managed and monitored. So if you are providing data through a portal, so you should be able to restrict access to some of these data, and you should look at who is actually accessing and getting data out of that. Okay. Monitoring has a very special meaning in the context of high-performance computing. So I wanted to take the opportunity here to say that monitoring is not only about performance here, it's also about making sure that the data integrity is being verified, and that the backup have been done properly, and that no data that you're not expecting to leave is leaving. Okay, so it's much broader than only performance. You should also assume that someone will attempt to get your data while they are not authorized to do so. So you have to plan for that and make sure that such access will be prevented. Okay. We are not only talking here about data hosted at Compute Canada. An attacker will usually use the weakest links. So most of the recent attacks I've seen, they always compromise your desktop or lab computer first, and then they escalate to Compute Canada. So be aware that you have to protect all layers of your operation to make it secure. So moving to slide 17. Patch operating system and application. So usually people understand that as really the first part, which is patching the operating system, but the word applications here is really key, okay? So the blue highlights timely patch maintenance. So patching after 2 years is not timely, okay? It leaves the door open for people for a while, so you have to be aware that a patch is available and apply it, okay? They also recommend to use only supported and up-to-date versions. So in the academic community, this is very challenging, but it does mean that if you are to use a software platform, you need to consider how to do its development and how to support it. Okay, and again, they are also recommended automation around that to make sure that you won't forget about it. So moving to slide 18. Trying to identify what it means for a research project. In the situation where you are running a virtual machine, that means you have to maintain the operating system and do security patch as soon as possible. But more generally, if you are not running VMs, or even if you do, it means you also need to know your software. Okay, research software could also lead to security breach. So in many cases, you would consider your software as being non-intrusive because it is limited to a user area of the system. But if the software is not running as it is expected, it could delete some of your data. So you have to be careful and test and validate and make sure that the software you're using are doing what you want to do. Okay, so update your software when you can. Also, there are more and more applications these days that try to connect to the outside, pushing notification to the internet, like completion of jobs, registering data in a database when a job is completed is very common, and people really enjoy that. Be aware that these bring more security concerns, because if there is a weakness in the exposure to the outside world, then all of your data might be compromised. So you have to be confident that the software behaves as you want. Okay. So moving to slide 19. Enforce the management of administrative privilege. So that means you have to minimize the number of users that have these privileges. Okay, you have to validate that these administrative privileges are still valid. Okay, they also recommend to have consistency between your administrative privilege and the level of exposure. That means the concept of need to know. I will come back to that after. Also, if you are managing authentication, that means that you should consider two-factor authentication, segregation of administrative right, and so on. So that can go very far. So you have to ask yourself, how do I manage my permission? How do I provide access to my different assets, whether it is data, software, and so on? Okay. So moving to slide 20, we'll try to see what it means. So usually, from my experience, we do not manage access in research project. Everyone has access to everything inside a research project. It might be fine, but you should ask yourself whether this is the appropriate way to do it. Usually, if you have a collaborator, you will only provide access to what he needs in order to contribute. I'm not talking here about someone trying to steal your data, while it's still a valid issue, but they can also just accidentally delete data or overwrite data. They could prevent our job from running by just misusing the system. So you have to be aware of these issues or these potential issues, these risks, and try to make sure they won't happen. Okay, some data might not be deemed sensitive. Okay, so usually we do promote the need to know principle. So if they don't need that data, maybe they should not have access to it. So that means managing your directory and your data structure. Okay. If you're running a VM, for example, in the cloud, that means that you have to manage your administrative function. Providing root to everyone that has to do a task in there is a very, 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 very bad behavior. You should not use root. You should manage the use of administrative privilege. Okay. You should also minimize who has access to it. Okay. So usually, a lot of VM that are compromised in the cloud, this happened because people just let all of the doors open for convenience. You have to not do that if you can, because there are a lot of technology to help you prevent that, like multi-factor authentication, IPsec tunnels, VPN, and so on. There are a lot of ways to limit the exposure for administrative functions, and please use them if you are running VM on the Compute Canada cloud. It will help you to have a secure VM. Okay, slide 21, please. So hardening operating system and application. So usually when we talk about hardening, a lot of people think about the first half again, about hardening the operating system. It means that you will disable all non-essential parts and services. Like if you are installing a new Linux distribution and you do not want to have a web server, then usually you will completely delete the web server files and so on to avoid accidentally running it. But it also, from an application perspective, is very important. As I said, more and more applications are interconnected today. So if you are testing a software for discovering whether it is interesting for you, if you don't delete it when you're done, it might stay there and be exploited by a third party. So be aware of your software and remove what you don't need. Okay. So moving to slide 22. Okay. So if you're running a virtual machine, disable everything you don't need, okay? Because there will be security issues with some of it, and by having it if it doesn't exist on your system, then you are not exposed to it. So it reduces the likelihood of a security breach, okay? Remember always that they will use the weakest link, and usually it is the link you are not working on anymore. Okay, it will always be the weak point that they will exploit, and very often it will be something external to Compute Canada. It will be your personal device. It will be your desktop, your lab equipment. So please run common security software on these as well, like anti-spyware, antivirus, and doing the hardening process I just described. Please do that on your desktop as well. Okay. So slide 23 now. Segment and separate information. So usually in various labs, people don't know all data they have. A given individual might know, but they don't know as a whole, as a project. Okay. So usually research projects are all about sharing, but sharing doesn't mean that you shouldn't separate or segregate information. And I will give you a good example. If for convenience you store all of your data on one virtual machine that includes a web portal, if you do store there very critical data sets and that system is being compromised, like a crypto lock attack, then you might lose all of it. And if there was no need for that data to be exposed to the web, then maybe you are taking too much risk for nothing. You should segregate this information and not expose the sensitive part of it. So let's move to slide 24 about that. So there will be mistakes. There will be security breach. There is no way you can prevent that. Okay, no one can really prevent that. We can limit the risk associated to it happening. So segregate your information, segregate your network if you're managing VMs. If you are also operating a research platform, you should also segregate your instrument in some ways to limit the exposure. Okay? So segregation might mean a lot of things, but usually we segregate based on sensitivity. Okay. So do not save or store data on a web server if it doesn't need to be there. Okay. So moving to slide 25. Provide tailored awareness and training. So we are trying at Compute Canada to provide more and more awareness around cybersecurity, but it is also your responsibility to make sure that your people in your team know what they have to do. Okay. So moving to slide 26. So you should have process to manage access to data, sharing, and so on. That means that everyone that is coming to contribute to your project should be aware of what you expect them to do. Okay? They might be security-related functions they need to be aware of. But it goes beyond that. Also, you should have people that have a minimal knowledge of information security and to understand how to protect research data. That doesn't need to be a certified security specialist, but there are a lot of training available out there that could help you improve your security. For example, one of the links I provided, the OWASP link, is exactly about that. It's about providing information to software developers to help them improve their security. Okay. So moving to slide 27. Protect information at the enterprise level. So basically, a research project is not an enterprise, but it's easy to understand that the information should be managed at least at the project level. Okay, so if you have 4 students contributing, you should make sure that the way data is preserved or is secured is consistent across these 4 individuals. Okay, they know exactly where data is, they know exactly what they have access to, they know how to do backup, and so on. Okay, so that is mostly around policy. So slide 28, thank you. So a research group should have well-defined security practice. Security doesn't mean closing doors. It means that we know exactly when we can share data, when data is to be backed up, and so on. Okay, so the expectation should be clear for everyone. Okay, especially around end-of-life expectations. So a lot of groups neglect that, and when they want to come back 2 years after a student has left, it's very difficult to know exactly how to retrieve the data. So please start planning about your data management. Okay, I already talked quickly about data ownership. So basically, data ownership is really a nightmare in the academic sector. So if you think that the data could be reused in the future, make sure you are clearly identifying the data ownership before the individual participating to your project or leaving. Okay, that will avoid a lot of confusion. Okay, there are also a lot of research data management tools and technology that are coming online these days, so you should also explore that and see how you could benefit from these to improve your security. Okay. So moving to slide 29, apply protection at the host level. So that one is more tricky for research project. But a lot of things are getting interconnected. A lot of services will be based on virtual machine that you will control. So having host-based intrusion prevention, monitoring is really something that you should be aware of. So moving to slide 30, very specifically, if you're running VMs, you should have strong firewalls rules that are consistent to what you want to do. In the context of CC services, we are monitoring for potential intrusion. Okay, it is very, very challenging due to the complexity of your usage pattern. But you could help us to improve this kind of exposure by not reusing your credential on other systems. Okay, so I'm aware of a lot of users that are using the same username, password, or minimally the same password on various systems. So if one of these systems is compromised, then the other one are compromised. They will be able to look at your history of connection, your SSH keys, your SSH history, and they will be able to exploit that password that they have access to. So if you want to help us, please do not reuse password if you can. Also, you can ask us about how to implement the key structure to enable better security practice. But if you are investigating how to do keys, please segment them. Having a single key that is being used everywhere or an empty passphrase key is also a very bad practice. So key is a good thing if you do it the right way, but you could also use it very wrongly if you're not aware of that. So moving to slide 31, I think this one is the last one. Isolate web-facing application. Okay, so it's very convenient to have a single server that do everything for you, but usually this is how you will fall. Okay, so you have to isolate what you can that will be talking to the outside, and everything should be not exposed to that environment. Okay, so moving to slide 32. Again, if you are running a VM, it will get compromised at some point. Okay, there is no question. It might be in 20 years, it might be in 2 months. There is a likelihood that it will get compromised. So limit the interconnection with other services or data sets to ensure that you will limit the consequences of that. Okay. If you are having, oh no, go back to slide 32, please. So your desktop, I'm focusing a lot on that because most of the incidents we're seeing these days are really starting from outside of Compute Canada. Okay, you do have to segregate as much as you can the functions that are there. So if you have a desktop that you are using daily and you are using there a database, you're using it to access Compute Canada, you're using it for web server, for sharing of data, that is maybe too much for a single environment. Maybe you should start segregating your function on that system to ensure security is being useful there. Okay. So moving to slide 33, so I was wrong, it's not the last one. Implement application whitelisting. So I've made a lot of research projects that were claiming to use over 30 software for the research project, but when you actually look at what is being used, it's way less than that. Okay, so it's hard for us to tell you what to use, what not to use. You are the only one that know exactly what is valuable for you. So let's go to slide 34 to give you some example of what it means for whitelisting. So if you are using a research software to do publication, which you are likely doing, so you might be using a software that is misconfigured or that is broken, and that will result in wrong publication, and that will have impact on you. So usually what we mean by whitelisting in that context is that you will only use software that are known to be stable or the configuration has been validated, and you will only use that very specific configuration to do your publication data, for example. You also have to be aware that you will likely need to play around with that software, and this is fine. It just means that you will control what version will be used for publication, and you will segregate the production and development environment. So if you need to play around, you will do it in an environment where it's unlikely that the data will be used for the publication itself. Okay. So documentation around that and having segregation of functions will facilitate that. So moving to slide 35, do you have any question about these top 10? And I understand it has been very quick, so but I'm happy to try to clarify if there is any need for it.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. That was a really good overview, I think. Yeah, the stuff, of course, that I get involved with is things like the ownership and sharing ends and using those tools and having some kind of research data management plan. Always good ideas. And I think all the universities, all the institutions are now encouraging strongly their members, staff, researchers to have a research data management plan. And I think many universities have got now groups in IT services who can help build those kinds of things.
It is an initial investment, but on the long run, I've seen that when I was doing my PhD. Once you have taken the first step, then you're saving a lot of time on doing your research. So it is a good investment.
Yeah. Yep.
And it doesn't need to be complex. It doesn't have to.
Yep. So any questions out there? I don't see any. I'll sort of take over from there, Jonathan. Say thanks a lot. That was great. Yeah, and I had just one or two slides, which was some kind of specific examples here. But one of the things I thought I would really talk about, just for a couple of slides, is Compute Canada's access control. We have at the moment 3 different approaches. There's the cloud, and Jonathan's been talking about the virtual machines. There are the general purpose systems, the big shared clusters, Cedar, Graham, and Beluga, and then the large parallel system in Toronto, that's Niagara. And those general purpose systems, Cedar and Graham, when you get an account, we give access permission, standard Unix access to your home directory, to the projects directory, and to Scratch. And I just thought I'd just highlight this. The stuff is all on the Docs wiki with the documentation for the systems. But for Cedar and Graham and Beluga, when it becomes active, your home directory /home/ your username, that one is generally is private to the user. So there's no group sharing. You're in your own personal group initially. That's how it's created. It's yours. Similarly, the project has a project directory, and your PI or supervisor manages that if they've been allocated a certain space in the project's areas, storage. By default, every user in the project has a subdirectory created, and I've just noted /project/ there's a project ID and then a username, and that also is private to the user. But everything else in that project is in the project group, and everybody has access to it. This is by default. This is how it's created in the first place. And a very, very standard issue that I deal with quite a bit is that a grad student leaves and has left behind some important data, outcome from runs, maybe some code that they've developed, and the supervisor wants access to it. What we do is attempt to get hold of the student and try to get permission from that student for the supervisor to get access to whatever he or she wants. In not a negligible number of cases, we can't get hold of the student. They've gone somewhere else, they've got a new job, whatever. And in that case, we usually try to get a permission from the institution, and then we'll give access. So I think that the point here is that while we say, for instance, that your home directory is private, there is a process, and we will give access to a supervisor if we get suitable permissions, approvals from the institution. So it's good to keep that kind of thing in mind. That's different from Niagara, the large parallel system. In Niagara, they've set it up so that everything is in the project's group. That's the Linux standard Linux group. And the project has access to it. So by default, in fact, even your home directory is accessible by people in the group. So that's a bit different, and it's important, I think, to keep an eye on that. That's a much more open system. I do note that, of course, it's Linux. You, the owner of anything in the Unix sense, can change the owner, can change the group, can change the access permissions with chmod, and there are some detailed access permissions with setfackle. So you can open up, you can close up the data too, but in those cases, it kind of comes down to that business that we will, if somebody wants access, we'll try to get the students or the owner's permission, and otherwise we'll go back to the institution to see if they will approve some other kinds of access. So here's where the kind of policy and such that Jonathan's been talking about kind of hits the road. We've got to create these things, and this is how we do it. And the cloud's completely different. Jonathan referred to the cloud quite a bit, but right now, a user gets some space on the cloud, that's virtual machines and storage, and the user owns that completely. You got to harden the system, you got to put the patches in, all the stuff that that Jonathan's been talking about. You're completely responsible for that. We ourselves, Compute Canada, and in particular the Cloud National Team, is very reactive. They keep an eye on the network interfaces. They get complaints from other people. We've had this happen where somebody's VM has been compromised, and that VM has been used to attack other systems. So we have to react to those things, and fundamentally we shut down the VM right away whenever we get a complaint, and then go and talk to the user. But it's important to note that when you create these things, it's yours, and you're responsible for the whole works. And the cloud team sent this out just, I think, last week. So I thought I'd just put it up here just to notice that funnily enough, around about Christmas time, and they're inclined to see a few more security-related instances on the cloud. And so it's a good idea to have a check and to see how your VMs are doing. Make sure that they are patched, that they're hardened up a little bit, and of course, ask. We have a very expert team at cloud@computecanada.ca who are very willing to offer a lot of advice on this kind of thing, because if your VMs do get compromised, then the cloud team can start having to track back, trace whole bunches of network logs and audit tables, and find out who's causing the problems. And that's a big effort. So we'd way prefer to have that controlled before we have to get involved with it. And then very related to storage best practices, that business of, have a data management plan. What we're seeing is this extremely wide range of research projects now. There really are research projects with clinical data and genomic data, bioinformatics data, which is really pretty sensitive. There are fields that are themselves very competitive and getting published, 2 weeks before the other guy starts to become important. And in that case, protecting the algorithms, the analysis techniques, all those kinds of things is important. We also have the other way around. The other extreme end is a lot of our researchers have very open websites. It's all open source. They distribute it all. But that underlines some of Jonathan's points, that it's important to understand your data and your projects and your students, and try to figure out where you fit in the whole spectrum. So number 2, discuss if you can. Number 3, some PIs we've got will, right at the beginning, they get a grad student coming in who joins the team. Right away, they ask the grad student to explicitly give them permission to access the data that the grad student has. That's perfectly reasonable, and it kind of helps me a lot when a supervisor can say, I got permission already, so now that I need to get in, and I can do so. And you'll notice everything revolves around that project lead, the principal investigator, the PI, or the supervisor. Some project leads are not very involved in the management of their compute systems, so you can designate an additional team member. That we've just started to do that. So that's really good. So you get all the, if a security breach does happen, at least 2 of you get the notification. Right, so that was just kind of underlying a bit of Jonathan's stuff, and I say thanks again to Jonathan for working through this, and we're sort of intensely at the moment in Compute Canada really working to update a lot of our policies and get them out there. I think you'll see quite a lot of stuff happening in the next year on some definitions and characterizations of where data is. So I want to do our usual and very brief notes about outages, maintenance. CEDAR's had some real issues over the last couple of months. They turned out to be, especially in these big things, a series of different issues. They discovered a bug in the Lustre file system stuff. There's incompatibility with the interconnects, with the OmniPath, and we've had some issues with users. Again, we really are pretty open. Users can submit 1 million jobs if they want, and in this case, something went wrong on that kind of submission. So I think we've been pretty stable for the last week or so. Many congratulations to the SFU team who have been, as you noticed, back in early November, they worked a whole weekend, and essentially the whole weekend, 48 hours, to get some of those upgraded Lustre and patch that stuff. So I got my fingers crossed. And just last week, a brief power outage. And I noticed that the Nearline service, which I think you've seen in the resource allocation competition, we've been advertising it for, I think, 2 years, but it's in progress. We should really have that on CEDAR for RAC 2019 in April. And similar to the cloud partition, the Cloud National Team guys are about to visit SFU and put in the cloud allocation. And there's also a big Lustre expansion, about 10 petabytes of new data, of new storage. So we really do understand how much storage is blowing through the roof, and we've moved a number of funds into purchasing more storage. Yeah, Graham had some issues. I think you've probably seen those, but nothing too exciting. The Arbutus Upgrade, I've mentioned this in the last couple of town halls, where the cloud guys have been buying new nodes and lots more new storage, and all users should have been notified by now. Just notice that the approach was that they're going to take the new purchase, create a whole new cloud using all the best practices and the most up-to-date approaches and software updating mechanisms, and they're moving right now all the users from the old cloud to the new cloud. When that's complete, they'll take all the old hardware and integrate it into the new stuff. So you should be receiving notices as we speak. I think almost all of it's done, and congratulations to the Cloud National team, who have been really trying to organize all this and keep it scheduled.
Check. There's just a question in the chat about the cloud outage last week.
Let's see. Oh, I have a question about the network outage in the cloud last Friday. I do not know about that particular one. And yes, I think, Falk, in our in the way we're going at the moment, this seems to be that we have an outage a couple of times a year from the cloud. We're learning as we go along, but I think that's about what we seem to be having. So it's an IaaS cloud, and it's kind of a best effort. If you're very worried about reliability, integrity, and such, then you should talk to us, and we should start thinking about having some kind of distributed system where if one node goes down, the other node stays up. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yep, I think that's exactly it. The Falk has just noticed that, yeah, that's the expectation, so you have to work around it. Exactly. Okay, Orsnus, this is just a reminder. Orsnus is going at the end of March. That's our oldest legacy system. So, yeah, start moving to Cedar and Graham, and you'll have some notifications going out shortly. I think we're running a little bit out of time, so I won't talk about some of this, but just mention Beluga. That's the big Calcul Quebec version and new system, and it's going in great. The Dell has installed it, and they're running all the acceptance tests. I think, in fact, they're just finished those. So from what I hear, the Calcul Quebec team will get the machine either now-ish or early in January. They'll, of course, have to run all their tests, and there'll be some issues going back and forth. So we are on schedule for April and RAC 2019, which is fantastic. I think that's great. Yeah, some issues with Cedar. These are these little things that keep appearing. You can read this slide. I'm not going to go over it in detail. And I say that Nearline is happening, so I really hope we can get this, because, again, storage is one of our big issues. So remember that the idea here is that you'll be able to copy files. These are inactive files that you don't really need on project or scratch storage or home directories, and you just want to, but you don't want to get rid of them yet. So you put them in a special place, which we call Nearline, and then the system will auto-migrate that to tape. And then when you want to get it back again, you just go and access a stub, and the system will bring it back from tape as quick as it can. And SFU is in the middle of purchasing the disk cache that is the Nearline space. It turns out that the tape system is actually running sort of 24 hours flat out all the time now, so that has to be upgraded too. But we are expecting that this will be up and running by April. So we'll get back to you with some details of how to do that one. Erin, are you going to give us a quick look at some of the stats we got from the survey?
Yeah, I'll just run through. We are running behind time a little bit. Thank you to everyone who took the time to fill out the survey and provide really great feedback. Great response rate again this year, and similar profiles to our general user base as a whole in terms of fields of study and institution and province. 86% reported being satisfied with WestGrid. And some nice quotes here. The progress and research is much faster with WestGrid. We need you. Next slide. We asked about in general, what the most important resources were and this time we actually wanted to know in terms of compute cycles and storage what was most important. So unsurprising, compute cycles, number one. But we also saw people really need user support in terms of online user support, and also more advanced training for users to use these resources. So that was good to know, and good to know going forward. Active storage also very important. Next slide. We tried to get some feedback on some potential new resources that WestGrid could provide, and the most valuable one, according to respondents, was to have some kind of a testing environment, a good option for users to go from local systems before they branch up onto the national platform. And again, support was a very big need. So we will work on that. Next slide. Some user support information. People use support a little bit less this year than last year. I think less migration, thankfully, for most of our WestGrid users, but still very satisfied with the support they received in terms of timeliness and helpfulness of recommendation. These slides are available to everyone, so feel free to go through, and we'll provide a little bit more details in the new years in terms of what our next steps are going to be. So I think probably we can skip the rest, and we'll move on to Alex.
Okay, thank you. So before I go into training, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the visualization competition that we had running. So next slide, please. The Visualize This competition has been running for 3 years now, so now it's in its 3rd year. And this year we decided to do something a little bit different. So we provided 2 data sets. One is from a scientific simulation, biomolecular simulation. The other one is from humanities and social sciences. And we asked participants to come up with their visualizations to answer some questions that we provided to them. So the data sets were available for downloading on October 1st, and participants had 2 months to work on this. We had 31 people registering for the competition, so we had several really good submissions. And last week, the selection committee met, and we decided on the winners. So next slide, please. So today, we are happy to announce the results. The first place was taken by Philippe Nazaire, a data visualization developer at Université de Quebec Rimouski. Philippe's visualization is a static website with 2 layers. The first layer is a 3-dimensional force graph, where you can select a predicate and set it to a certain value. So for example, a person has active involvement in socialism, or to multiple values, and that generates a dynamic graph that you can spin in 3D, and where you can actually drag those around and click on them. And the second layer is a map with markers and human readable biographies for a large number of authors. So on the results page that I link here on the slide, you can see a screen capture of this website in action. So we don't have a link to the website itself because currently it's running on a very low power VM. So we are planning to put it on a beefy VM where it'll be open to the world. But for now, we just have a video where you can watch different interactions. The second place went to Usman Alim and Robert Mora from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Calgary. And they went for the scientific visualization. So they visualized protein-membrane interaction in 3D using some clever Python scripting, VTK, and ParaView. And you can study their Python code on the same results webpage. And finally, the third place was taken by Catherine Winters from the Digital Humanities Innovation Lab at Simon Fraser University. So this visualization is powered by JavaScript libraries, D3.js and 3.js. And it's only partially complete, so we're not showing it in the results page for now, but we're hoping to add it soon. So that's all I want to say about the Visualize This. And next, I'm going to jump to our upcoming training in winter-spring 2019. So we have already finalized the list of webinars for our winter-spring semester. The first webinar is going to be actually a continuation of a November webinar on YT visualization. So it's going to be part 2 of YT, specifically working with data objects and using data objects to take data and process it elsewhere in 3D visualization packages such as ParaView, etc. So the second one is going to be on text parsing with HPC. So this is going to be quite interesting because normally you don't associate HPC with something where you process text. Then we have memory debugging with Valgrind, another visualization webinar, research data management, a little bit more advanced webinar on Chapel, so actually working with tree structures in distributed data structures in Chapel in early April, bioinformatics, programming best practices, and finally, in mid-May, we have a webinar on Julia programming language. So we've been trying to get into teaching researchers Julia because it's one of the hot new programming languages, and it's quite interesting. So we did it a couple of years ago in one of our summer schools, and we'll try to do a webinar this semester. So all of these are regularly updated. So right now, there are no links to the registration pages, but typically a few weeks before each webinar, we'll post the details registration page and an abstract description, and it will be linked on the page where that you see the link for on this slide. So next, please. And in addition to online training, our staff organize a lot of events at individual sites. A lot of these events are still in the planning stages, so we don't have the exact dates. Please check this webpage for updates and links to registration pages and so on. So the earliest big event is a 4-day, in quotes, winter school at the University of Saskatchewan, where we'll be teaching a range of subjects. So it's going to be, that page is already up and you can register for it. And we also have 2 big summer schools, the same as we had for the past few years. So this year's summer schools are going to be at the University of Calgary last week of May, and then sometime in June again at UBC in Vancouver. And the final slide is the next one I have. Is just a quick reminder about the training materials page. So this is the page where we put all our training materials, so the slides from various presentations, summer school slides, videos, screencasts, and we try to keep it updated so we don't leave old materials there. And there is tons and tons of information. Getting started programming. If you go to click on domains, you will see links to bioinformatics, humanities, molecular dynamics, astrophysics. If you click on tools, you will see pages on visualization, cloud computing, and scheduling. And of course, all our upcoming events will be listed in our blog section. So that's all I have for my part.
Yeah, say thanks, Alex. That was great, and Aaron. So I think we've got, you know, it's going to be a busy year next year, and plus things like Beluga coming online. Anyway, any other questions? I see there was some discussion going on in the chat. And otherwise, I think that's about it. Merry Christmas, everybody. Hope you have a good one. Don't work too hard and get some time off. And we're done.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.